You want to tell it to me?
The 2024 film Joker Folie A Deux, directed by Todd Phillips, came out in October, and it flopped. It has gotten so many bad reviews, and audiences were especially upset after its initial release since Joker 2019 is redeemed as a fantastic film. I was honestly shocked because I loved the first film. I thought Todd Phillips was a great director for the Joker, and I respect his creative mind. So I had a hard time figuring out whether I should trust the audience or the director. A lot of sources and film influencers were saying the movie was very disappointing, and they even encouraged their viewers to not see the film. But on the other hand, I thought, if Phillips can make such a great film that is The Joker, how could he absolutely tank the sequel? So I decided to go into the theater with no expectations. I tried not to let outside influences have an effect on my viewing experience. And after the credits rolled, I left the theater absolutely blown away by how amazing this movie was. I found myself actually disagreeing with many of the reviews that I've read. I feel like a lot of people really just missed the target on this movie. And I really love movies. I even aspire to be a filmmaker myself one day. So I felt motivated enough to make a whole YouTube video about why this movie is actually great. My goal in this video is to hopefully change your perspective on this movie so the next time you see it, you can see it from a different lens and hopefully appreciate it more. Before I get started, I think one thing many people can agree on is that this film is visually stunning. The cinematography and direction is undeniably great. From opening wonders to color balance, color contrast, rule of thirds, positive and negative space, or framing, this movie truly had it all. I think Todd Phillips really leaned into the chaotic feeling of Joker's mind, and it shows visually, especially in those musical numbers. Now, speaking of those musical scenes, I thought that they were brilliant. People kept complaining about how this movie was unnecessary as a musical or nobody asked for it to be a musical. I actually think that it makes perfect sense for this film to be a musical. I think it makes perfect sense for Arthur to fall into these musical trances from time to time because when you really look back at the first film, the most iconic scenes of Arthur taking those big steps into the Joker persona have this sort of musicality to them. For instance, after he makes his first few murders, he dances in a bathroom. He loves Frank Sinatra, and That's Life basically becomes an anthem for that first movie. I mean, there's a whole scene of him dancing down a flight of stairs to rock and roll. I'm definitely not calling Joker 2019 a musical, but there are elements of music that's juxtaposed with the Joker. So in the sequel, when he's fully realized himself as Joker and stops taking his medication in Arkham, it makes sense for that element of music to come out even more. And whenever he's around Harley, she instigates Arthur into embracing the Joker, so the musical scenes get even more eccentric and visually ambitious, especially whenever they duet. I think it's also important to state that these musical scenes make an indication that Arthur and the Joker are two different personalities. Arthur represents mental illness and the struggle of lower class citizens, whereas Joker represents anarchy and rebellion. The Joker is like a fantasy escape for Arthur. He falls back on this persona to laugh at the cruelty of the world around him. This movie really leans into that concept of a fantasy escape by depicting it through these musical numbers. There's a line in the movie where Harley even addresses the Joker persona as a fantasy. And Arthur uses the Joker persona, or this fantasy escape, as a weapon/defense mechanism to fight back against society. And the duality of these characters is really tragic because Arthur has to use the Joker as a mask, literally. And I feel like most audiences heavily misunderstood that part of Phillips' Joker after watching the first movie. The Joker is not who Arthur is or who he becomes. Arthur is just a broken man that has to cope with his tough life by putting on the makeup. And this misunderstanding is a part of the reason why I think Phillips was disappointed with how audiences glorified Joker 2019. Let's be honest, when we think of Joker 2019, we first remember scenes like Joker going down the stairs, Joker shooting Murray, or the bathroom scene. But we never think of scenes like Arthur on the bus alone, Arthur squeezing the leather on his shoes, or reaching out to billionaire Thomas Wayne, his alleged father that abandoned him. My point is that the audience overlooked the message of the movie and had the majority of their focus on the chaotic Joker scenes. And that's because that's the Joker we know from the comics, pure anarchy. And to really top it off, the darkest scene in the movie was turned into a meme. And to be honest, I think Todd Phillips wasn't actually planning on making a sequel, but after he saw that audiences missed the point, he probably felt the need to spin back. But instead of emphasizing his point, he had a different goal with this movie. I feel like this should be obvious, but I believe that Phillips' goal with this movie was to make a satire. Now, Phillips achieves this through his depiction of Harley Quinn. In this movie, Harley isn't just a love interest, she's a representation of the audience. Joker's mob also represents the audience, but is most heavily implied by Harley's character. Throughout the sequel, Harley overlooks Arthur's personality and idolizes the Joker. She loves the Joker because he represents anarchy, chaos, and rebellious behavior. Her difference in treatment between Arthur and the Joker is clear because Arthur doesn't resemble any of those traits. Furthermore, her actions are an example of the audience's difference in engagement between Arthur's scenes and the Joker scenes. Like I said earlier, audiences wanted to see more of the chaotic anarchy behavior that the 2019 film had so much of. Like Harley, audiences glorified Joker's horrible acts of revenge on Gotham. Even at the end of the film, when Arthur decides to drop the Joker act, he asks Harley to escape with him, but she rejects him because she never wanted to be with Arthur Fleck. She only wanted to be with the Joker. Much like how audiences didn't expect to go watch a film about a man's mental disorder and personality struggles. They wanted to see the Joker that they know and love from the comics cause chaos across Gotham City. And I think many people assumed that they would see more of that stuff happen in the sequel because of the way that the first film ended. But this goes back to the fact that Todd Phillips never even planned on making a sequel. I believe that one of the reasons why he made the sequel is to further emphasize his points from the first film. And if he had the Joker going on a killing spree, at least literally, like the first film did, he would have failed at emphasizing those points again. That's why there are many connections between Harley, the Joker mob, and us, the audience, throughout the film. I'm confident that Phillips knew how the audience was going to react to this film because while he is pushing his ideas further, he took away all that quote-unquote fun stuff, so there's no room for people to glorify anything again or make it a meme. This film is just straight up all about Arthur's mental disorders and how society views him. And he uses Harley and the mob as an allegory for the audience to criticize us for how Joker's 2019 was received. And that's why I believe this movie is a satire. When you really look at this pair of movies, it's a very tragic story about Arthur Fleck's life and how the society he has to survive in is ignoring his pain. Even us, the audience, have been ignoring his pain. Just as Arthur closes out the Joker's dark persona, he is killed by a deranged fan, who's most likely going to become the Joker we know from the comics. I think this is Phillips' way of mocking the audience for how these films are being received. This film was gutted at the box office because people can't comprehend or care for a story about a mentally unstable man being crumbled by society's brutality and pressure. They would rather watch a real villain unleash his wrath on the world in brutal action scenes. I think the end of the movie is Phillips' way of saying, fine, here's the real Joker. Is this what you wanted? Is this what you expected from these films? I can feel how this movie was created out of frustration, and honestly, I feel frustrated as well. As this devastated man is bleeding out on the floor, the only thing he thinks about is how the audience is cheering on his death. It's like Phillips knew we were going to ignore the message again in this film, and it's really telling when the reviews say, "This is not my Joker," "Musicals suck," "This was a waste of my time," or "Don't go see this film, it's bad." Joker Folie A Deux is a brilliant satire, and it doesn't deserve the hate it's getting, because its criticism is a very real stance on how the topic of mental instability is often overlooked. And that message needs to be recognized. People like Arthur need to be recognized. It's a real shame that this movie probably won't be appreciated for a long time, but I really do hope that it eventually gets its flowers. That's mainly what I have to say about the film, but I just wanted to cover an extra note that I have before I close out. A complaint I see often about both movies is that this Joker is not very comic accurate. And throughout this video, I've alluded to the fact that this Joker isn't ripped from the comics, but I still defend this interpretation because I both agree and disagree with this complaint. Before I even continue with what I'm saying, I want you to know that I am also a massive believer that comic accuracy is extremely important when it comes to making comic book movies, and it can really make or break a comic book movie for me personally. I don't think Phillips chose not to make this Joker comic accurate. I think he just highlighted a certain aspect of the Joker and prioritized it in these films. One of the best versions of the Joker is from the Killing Joke comic, and that's partly because we get some insight into Joker's background. In this comic, we get a peek into the aspects of One Bad Day, and I think Phillips wants to put those aspects of the Joker at the forefront of Arthur's character rather than focusing on his acts as a villain. So I wouldn't say that this Joker is completely comic book inaccurate, it's just a very specific interpretation of the character, but it's still true to the source material. That's all I have to say for this movie. I really hope people look back at it and appreciate it more than they did after their first watch. And if this video helped you realize that, then that's really cool. And I appreciate you for being open-minded about it and listening to what I had to say. I would say go check out my other videos, but this is literally my first one, so stay tuned for more to come in the future. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more content, drop a like, and drop a comment below if you want to add to the conversation. Have a good day, and peace out.